So welcome once again. Thank you, Freda, for the introduction to the women's group. Thank you, Greer, for taking the time to be with us today. Um, Everybody who's on right now, hopefully a lot more people are coming in, but we are having some issues, so we're trying to fix it as we go. We keep everyone muted during this meeting, by the way. If you want to ask questions, please use your chat functions, and those who don't use Zoom all the time, there are a few of us probably these days, click to the middle of the bottom of your screen and hover over it, and you'll see a little icon saying chat. You can post a question to me directly or to the group, and I will read it up to Greer for him to answer it. So that is how we used to conduct our forums, and that actually went quite well, so we'll stay right with that. So, Greer, thank you for coming tonight. Like I said, we would like to find out who you are, hopefully have you tell us a little bit about yourself and specifically why you want to be a council member, what you would like to change when you're elected, and please try to be as specific as you can with your answers. You are a Palo Alto native, and I hear that is a very rare species, so very happy to have you here. You were born and raised in Palo Alto. You married here, you teach here, as many of us who have school children know. Currently, you're at Palo. You're the Student Activities Director, and I bet that is a very interesting position right now, given that everything is online. And that is what I found very interesting about you. You are a trained lawyer. You went to the Santa Clara University School of Law, but you decided that teaching was more fulfilling to you. So that is something I found very striking, and it's certainly not a very common thing to pivot over from law to teaching. So you can tell us more about that too. But you are no stranger to public engagement. At the age of 23, you were appointed to the Palo Alto Human Relations Commission and subsequently became its chair. You helped organize the Homeless Veterans Summit a couple of years ago. And in 2017, Supervisor Joe Zamidian appointed you to represent Palo Alto on the Santa Clara County Human Rights Commission. Currently, you are the vice chair of the Justice Review Committee. That is the committee that led the fight against changing county policy to allow county officials to coordinate with federal agents. And I would like to come back to how you reached, or you came to that decision when we talk about your ideas for the police and how you would like to reorganize, if you want to reorganize the police. So in that group of questions that we will come to, I would like you to come back to that and explain to us a little bit more about that decision. But for right now, I would like to invite you to tell us more about yourself, give us a little bit of a feel who you are and why we should vote for you.
Great. Thank you for that introduction, Jeanette. I appreciate it. And thank you everybody for coming out tonight. It's a really great opportunity to just be able to meet all of you, and I'm looking forward to our discussion this evening. So let me start with just, I guess, a little more detailed kind of background about me, my path towards my decision of running for office, and then I'll tell you about my focus areas for this campaign and what I hope to accomplish if I'm so fortunate to be able to be elected to the Palo Alto City Council. So as you mentioned, Jeanette, I was raised in Palo Alto, went to schools at Duveneck, Green, graduated from Palo myself. So it really is kind of a dream come true, and oftentimes so surreal to be able to be actually the student activities director at the school that I got to attend as a student. And it says so much about the teachers here too, that most of my teachers that I had are still teaching here today. So it's I think a pretty cool thing. So when I graduated from Palo, I got my degree in political science from the University of California in Irvine, and then returned to the Bay Area to pursue my law degree at Santa Clara. And it was during my first year actually at Santa Clara Law School where I I was sort of tired of learning about the theoretical piece of law, and I was always been interested in social justice issues. I really wanted to be able to do more, and especially wanted to be able to do more in the community that gave me so much. And especially going off to college, going off to law school, really did show me how privileged and lucky and fortunate we are to live here in Palo Alto. And the education that it provides and the values that it instills in people. Just I felt so much of my life really was owed to this community, and so I wanted to find a way to be able to give back to this community. And so I found an opportunity on the Human Relations Commission, applied, and was appointed by the city council, as Jeanette mentioned, when I was 23 years old. Served on that commission for several years, focused on issues such as homelessness, senior citizen services, and especially I found a great interest on Project Safety Net, and really just got really passionate about finding ways to be able to help our young people in town who are suffering from mental health. And of course, we all remember the tragic kind of pandemic of teen suicides that were occurring around that time as well. And also around that time too, unfortunately, one of my best friends from high school also ended up taking his life. And so it was a difficult time for me, and I kept trying to find ways to be able to, I don't know, just find ways to be able to use kind of my talents, my education, my energy to be able to improve this community, and especially for young people. And so it was through Project Safety Net and a few other groups as well, where I was learning the importance of having a trusted adult in the lives of young people who are not their parents, that that is one of the key components to be able to kind of battle these issues of youth mental health problems. And my mom is a teacher, my wife's a teacher. It just kind of it runs in my blood. I was a substitute teacher as well while studying for law school, and realized that my life could be far better used by serving in a different capacity than being an attorney. I worked in the district attorney's office. I did family law. I did some criminal law as well there, and just felt like I could definitely better serve people by being a teacher. So I made the career change to do that. And so since being a teacher, I've taught at JLS. Last year, I taught at Gunn High School. And this year, as you mentioned, I'm the student activities director here, but I also still teach one class of U.S. history over at Gunn. And it really is just a great time to be talking about, be focusing on kind of social justice issues. And so I'm running this time. I ran back in 2016. I'm running this time because I really do believe that we have this really unique opportunity right now. The pandemic that's occurred this year has been tragic. It has derailed all of our lives, and we're all going through so many struggles. And yet I see that there is an opportunity right now to be able to, what many commentators have coined, a great reset. And it's this idea that we're going to have this really limited amount of time where we can kind of forego the antiquated systems that have caused issues like climate change, our traffic problems, affordable housing, and be able to address those in ways that are going to be long lasting and really systemic. Because I think the world right now, we're seeing so many of these benefits that have come out from shelter in place. We've seen improvement in the environment, in our air quality. I mean, during about a 7-week span at the height of shelter in place back in April, greenhouse gas emissions in the Bay Area were reduced by 32%. That's incredible. And we've all seen how much better our traffic was and our parking, all of that starting to return, unfortunately, but we see the benefits of it. And now employers know that telecommuting actually works. And that it works just as well for most professions. It definitely does not work as well as an educator, I can tell you that. But so we're going to have this opportunity when this ends to make a decision. Do we want to go back to the old ways? Do we want to go back to the times where our streets were gridlocked? Do we want to go back to the times where housing affordability does not allow opportunities for low-income communities here in Palo Alto, does not provide opportunities for teachers like myself to be able to live here? and I think we're going to make, I think this community is ready for that shift and that change, and to be able to find ways to be able to kind of forge ahead with a more equitable and fair future for everybody in this community. And so, yeah, I'm running to be able to make that change. I'm really going to be focusing on issues of affordable housing, which is very, very dear to my heart and important to me. Both my wife and I are teachers. We rent a one-bedroom apartment here in Palo Alto. And so affordable housing is going to be key. Traffic reduction is one of them. Focusing on climate change as well. We're all being impacted right now by climate change with the fires. Especially for me, it has become incredibly personal. Both my parents right now live in Boulder Creek. So does my sister with her family. They were all evacuated last week, and we're all just kind of, holding on to hope, making, we haven't received any news, just really hoping that everything is going to be okay. And also focusing on this idea of a closer government community partnership as well. I'm the chair of Palo Alto's largest residents association, the Midtown Residents Association. And one thing that has always frustrated me being chair of that association is the lack of communication from the city of Palo Alto, and oftentimes what kind of feels like we're just another checkbox that they have to mark off when making major decisions that are going to impact our lives. I want to see that reversed, and making sure that community members are really much more active and cared for of our opinions in city decisions. So those are some of the areas that I'm going to be focusing on. Again, I'm really happy to be here. Thank you so much, and I'm happy to just kind of excited to answer questions and get to know all of you a little better. So Jeanette, you're muted.
Thank you very much for this introduction. Obviously, like I said in the beginning, we want to get some very specific answers out of you. So you mentioned that there is a window of opportunity to change things through this pandemic. And you were pointing at affordable housing, at climate change, and this partnership between government and the community. Could you be a little bit more specific as to what exactly it is that you want to do, you specifically, when you are a council member? So let's start with affordable housing. What do you want to do?
So on affordable housing, I think we can all agree Palo Alto has not done it has not done enough in the past several years to be able to address issues of affordable housing. For example, since 2015, Palo Alto has only permitted 555 new housing units. Palo Alto really does have a crisis of affordability, not so much on market rate housing. Palo Alto and the state of California actually does very well at does pretty well at creating market rate housing. Like in 2018, we met 52% of our market rate housing within our regional housing needs allocation, but we only met 6% of our very low income housing numbers. So I really want to make sure that we're focusing our housing policies in ways that's actually going to be able to create opportunities for low-income communities, workforce housing as well for teachers. I mean, one of the teachers that I worked with next door last year at Gunn, she moved out of the district this year to move to Oregon because they couldn't afford to live here. These are real life problems that are impacting not only our friends and neighbors and coworkers, but also our students. We're not gonna be able to recruit the best teachers into this district if they can't afford to live here. So I'm focused on, as far as my housing strategy goes, the first one is trying to balance the jobs housing imbalance that Palo Alto has. We have one of the worst jobs housing ratios in the entire country. Right now, it's close to four jobs for every housing unit. And since I think 2010, we've been adding about 13.1 jobs for every new housing unit. That's not a workable solution. It's just going to continue to worsen our housing problems. So finding policies that are going to be able to get us closer to that jobs housing parity. If a developer is going to want to actually build a new office development that's going to bring in 500 new employers, well, they should also be then responsible for being able to help them provide the necessary housing to be able to reach that type of jobs housing parity. Another piece of this too is when we just leave housing to the market. If we leave development to just the free market in Palo Alto, developers are going to build what's going to give them the greatest bang for their buck, which is going to be always office first because it sells for about $12 a square foot. Then the next is going to be luxury housing, which sells for about $4 a square foot. And affordable housing is far, far, far below that. So we need to rework the economics here to really be able to force these developers to not be choosing the office choice. We can have a more stringent office cap, as well in a way to be able to sort of curb the market forces there. The next piece of it is making sure that we are preserving the housing that we have. The most affordable housing in Palo Alto is always going to be the housing that currently exists. One of the things that I would do is I would implement a no net loss housing policy within my first 6 months, essentially requiring developers to not be able to destroy housing. And if they are going to destroy the housing, they need to then replace it with the same or greater amount of housing and find ways to be able to make sure that we're not then displacing the residents in those housing units while that construction is taking place. We see examples of these all over the country when municipalities do upzoning and say it's going to be the solution, it's going to bring in more affordability, and in fact it actually does the opposite, and it oftentimes leads to massive displacement. We're seeing that in Harlem right now, where upzoning has led to massive displacement of communities of color there, and really bringing it and is gentrifying that area rapidly. And then the final piece is actually investing in affordable housing here in Palo Alto. We need to look at additional income sources to be able to do that. So looking at a business tax when this pandemic has ended, when the economy stabilizes, and looking into a business tax, as well as other type of income streams that other cities around the country are doing. So for example, City of Seattle, what they've done is they've implemented a tax on speculative buying within their community of housing. So essentially they're experiencing many of the problems we're having here, where people outside of the United States purchase homes in Palo Alto to use it as an investment tool and never actually live there. And nothing so far can be done about that. If we had a tax on that, that would not only, I think, dissuade people from using homes here just as an investment tool, but also could help bring in much needed income. And finally, one of the key pieces too is enacting the Palmer Fix. So the Palmer Fix, basically we have inclusionary zoning in the city of Palo Alto. So new housing has to have at least 15% affordable housing. I think that should be increased. San Francisco has it at 25%. We should explore policies to see how far can we go to make it work in Palo Alto. But we don't have that for rental housing. But City of Palo Alto, City Council has had the opportunity for the last 2 years because of a court case decision to actually enact the Palmer Fix, but they have not done it. We just had an approval by the Planning and Transportation Commission for a new rental development over on San Antonio. It's going to have over 100 units there. Because the Palmer Fix has not been enacted, none of those are going to be below market rate. That is an absolute shame, and I would make sure that changes. Sorry, I'm very long-winded at times. My students hate it, so my apologies.
Very good information, so we really appreciate that. And I want to close this whole housing issue with two additional questions. And one is from Abby Bratsky, who asked, what do you think about Stanford's practice of buying houses in neighborhoods and selling or renting them only to Stanford members? So that's the first thing. And the second one is just a little addition from my side. I would like to hear how you were talking about forcing developers to build a certain way, to build for low-income housing. Can you explain how you would do that? And then we'll close that housing part of the evening, and we move on because a lot of questions are coming in now.
Okay, so yeah, good question, Abby. As far as Stanford goes, I think a big concern about housing in Palo Alto is when you do have large organizations like Stanford who are buying up those housing, that makes it impossible for other people to be able to match those bids. I mean, yes, we have very wealthy people in Palo Alto, but not many of them can outpace Stanford in a bid for new housing. And so that, I think, is one of the reasons why our housing costs are so expensive, even at the market rate, when you have wealthy organizations like Stanford and other tech companies who have been doing the same thing as well, basically outbidding anyone else for that housing. So that's a deep concern of mine. And then to Jeanette, your question was about how do we get developers to actually build the low-income housing?
Want them to do.
Sorry?
To actually do what you want them to do.
Yes. So one piece. So there's several different ways. One, increasing that inclusionary zoning. So if they are going to be creating a new housing development, there does need to be greater than 15% of the inclusionary zoning in there, so we can have actually deed restricted below market rate housing. Another piece of it, as I kind of touched on before, is shifting the market dynamics to actually make it more to make it less likely that developers are going to be able to build offices over housing. So one of the ways in which that we can do that is just by having a much stricter office cap within the community. One thing that I find just kind of ridiculous is that our current office cap rolls over to the next year if it hasn't been met. And so I don't really quite understand I don't understand that. I feel like if we reach the end of the year and that office cap has not been met, we should, and more housing has been built, we should celebrate that instead of just saying, oh yeah, sure, go ahead, developers, you can build even more offices next year. So I think and developers are going to recognize that too, and maybe hold off for that extra development. So sort of trying to change those market dynamics so that developers are actually building housing. And then on the affordable piece, a lot of it is going to come down to having to have government subsidized housing. And again, that comes down and using and Palo Alto sort of using more public lands to be able to find ways in which we can build our housing there. There's been a lot of different cities around the world that have been using different models to do this. So like London has this really cool idea that they build deed restricted below market rate housing units, but then what they do to sort of offset that cost, then they actually have sort of an inclusionary zoning for market rate housing. So they'll have about 15, maybe to 20% of that deed restricted affordable housing project, about 10 to 15% of it actually being market rate, basically to just be able to offset the costs of that building every year. And they've been having incredible success over there. I really think Palo Alto needs to start thinking out of the box a little more and looking at these examples really around the world to be able to learn from.
Great, thank you very much. Moving right along to another complex of questions around the police. Sophie Tsang wants to know, what's your position on defunding the police? And in the same direction, Susan Newman would like to know, how would you reorient the work and training of local police to better address residents' concerns and safety?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a really important issue to me, and always and it's an incredibly complex issue. And I think my background plays to it really well, because I understand the importance of having a police department that can protect us, but also recognizing that our police department oftentimes has had problems with policing in this community, and many members of our community who are people of color do not feel safe and do not feel protected. I mean, from my background, I worked in the district attorney's office. My father was a police officer. But then also my background, chair of the Palo Alto Human Relations Commission and the vice chair of the Santa Clara County Human Rights Commission. So these issues are really important to me. I don't believe in defunding the police, rather reallocating resources. So I think one of the key areas where we need to work on is restructuring how the police are responding to calls that are not that are not violent calls or not legal calls. There's no need for a police officer to be responding to a mental health crisis within this community. Again, so many best practices around the country. Eugene, Oregon has this incredible program called Cahoots. They've been doing it for, I want to say, 5 to 10 years now, and it has saved the city millions of dollars. Their incidents of police violence and police shootings have just absolutely dipped down to having some of the best rates in the entire country. And how that program works is that when you call 911, you don't go to a police dispatcher. You go to they're not police, it's just another dispatch center, who then sort of triages the call and recognizes, okay, is this a call that requires police officers because it involves violence or actually involves a legal issue, or is this a mental health crisis? And depending on what it is, if it's a mental health crisis, they then contact mental health professionals who then show up, oftentimes with an ambulance as well, to the situation, and then they only call the police if it spirals out of control. But the data coming out of Eugene is showing it. They rarely ever have to call the police. And so I think that's one of the areas where we can really restructure our police department to do that. We also need our police department to be much more transparent. I think, government works for the people and needs to be transparent in order for a well-functioning democracy. And too often an incident happens and the city attorney, the police department, they all shut up and they don't want to share any information. I think that really is tragic, and we need to have a much more expedited process for that. And then finally, 8 Can't Wait is an important one to adopt. I'm glad to see that we're progressing there. And there are other things that we can be doing as well. Studies show that when you have at least 30% of your police department being female police officers, that actually then corresponds to almost a 30% dip in complaints of police misconduct and police brutality. So those are just areas where we should be sort of re-examining how are we doing our hiring practices. If somebody has a history of misconduct, they should not be hired in Palo Alto. And if they do, that should be a terminable offense, especially even like turning on your camera. How many times, like when I was in the district attorney's office, I was so frustrated that a police officer didn't have their camera on, and all they have to do is that, and it's on. But the policies are just a slap on the wrist. It's not a terminable offense for the department. That all needs to change. So there really is just a myriad of ways in which I believe we can reform the police department that's going to keep us all still safe, but also a police department that's going to work for everyone in this community.
Great, thank you very much. I think you answered that very all-encompassing. So let's move on to an issue that is very dear to us here in Southgate, because most of us are down here in Southgate. What is your position on the possibilities to cross for the Churchill crossing?
Okay, so as far as Churchill crossing for grade separations?
Grade separation, sorry.
Yeah. So this is one of those issues that, if elected, that issue might come before me on council, and so I want to be careful how I answer this to not give a definitive yes or no, because then that could require me to recuse myself in the actual vote. I will tell you how it is that I would come to that decision and the concerns that I do have of closing Churchill. One, not to the extent of all of you over there in Southgate living there, but being a Pali teacher, I understand, and just being a Pali teacher as well as having gone to school here, I understand the frustrations you have over there and the importance that the Churchill crossing does play in not only students coming into Palo Alto, but also all of you trying to get to your homes. I think this is one of those issues too that is really difficult to understand what the post-pandemic world looks like as far as traffic patterns, as far as workers in Palo Alto. One of the issues that I'm excited about is seeing how we can extend telecommuting even when this pandemic ends, to be able to start lowering the number of employees in this town, and then being able to redirect existing office over to housing. as well as then reduce traffic coming into this town. So it's really difficult to say post-pandemic, are the traffic patterns going to be the same or not? I'm hopeful they're going to be less, but let's just kind of go with the assumption that they are the same. If we close Churchill, that then puts all traffic coming into Palo, Stanford, Town and Country, the mall, going through Embarcadero. And that's already a very traffic heavy road in Palo Alto. And then when you bring in the whole issue too with Castellea and their desire to have more students, bringing in even more traffic, what the EIR shows, we're then continuing to have a even greater problem on Embarcadero and other thoroughfares in Palo Alto than we ever did before. So those are some of the issues that really concern me with the closing of Churchill, as well as the safety issue too of redirecting all students to bike down Embarcadero. And I mean, are really going to be taking almost half the student population at Palo that bikes using Churchill, directing them on Embarcadero, and I think that's going to lead to a lot of safety problems as well over there.
Well, I think we're also talking about an underpass for the bikes here, just to complete that. But I want to read what Terry Luck has to say on that. So you keep Churchill open. How do you protect the homes and families along Churchill? It's a small street and most cars are just passing through. Traffic and speed is not safe.
Yes, I completely agree with you, and I think that's one of those areas. I think that's one of those areas where we do need greater enforcement as well. Kind of going back to the police issue. Oftentimes in budgetary issues, our traffic enforcement division is cut almost immediately. I mean, back in 2008, our traffic enforcement was cut, and they didn't reinstall the traffic enforcement division, I think, until 2018. 2019 even maybe, and lasted for less than a year until now our current budget problems, and the traffic division was cut again. So when you do have a city with few police officers patrolling at one time and no traffic enforcement division, it kind of leads to this perfect storm of people not worried about speed limits and tickets. But that's not acceptable, especially in a school zone, and especially in a high school zone where you not only have inexperienced high school drivers, but also a lot of bicyclists, pedestrians, the community, and your neighborhoods as well. So enforcement is going to be key.
So in the interest of clear positions, you're against closing Churchill?
Well, again, I don't want to take a clear stand. I mean, I want to say a yes or no out of concern that I would not then be able to vote on it if I was elected, because I need to be able to be impartial as a council member and listen to both sides of it. But I do have concerns about it.
Okay, we'll leave it at that for now, but maybe you can give us an idea on which of the options that are on the table, and I understand your point of saying we don't know what the post-pandemic world looks like, but which of the options on the table now would you prefer, or would you like to go into without having to commit 100% to anything that puts you in trouble later?
I appreciate that. Yeah, it's unfortunate that the tunnel solution is just unrealistic and far too expensive. I have seen what the viaduct looks like. I've sat on some of these meetings and have held in my own neighborhood in the Midtown Residents Association. I've held meetings to try to help educate my own neighbors on these issues that are coming at us. So I'm not a fan of the viaduct. I do like the hybrid, kind of favor the hybrid version there, but I'm concerned about any takings that would be then required of private property, and I would be against anything that's going to require a taking of private property in the along the train corridor there. But I'm leaning towards the hybrid version. I do think it seems to make some of the most sense when we're trying to balance safety issues as well as as well as cost issues as well. And now again, what's so frustrating about all of this is all of the uncertainty that's coming at us as well, and the budgetary problems. Caltrain's ridership is down about 90 something percent right now, 97%. And there's all the issues with the funding of Caltrain as well. I do believe Caltrain will be around, and we absolutely need it. And the electrification is going to happen regardless of if we want it or not. So we do need to make a decision here, and we need to make it quickly because the deadline is fast approaching, even though it does keep getting extended. But it's coming.
So let me read two more comments to you from Terry. She's saying taking people's property, is that okay with you? You mentioned that in your current. I'm just reading her question to you, or rather her comments. So maybe you can comment on that. And she thinks that police is not an answer. That is not going to work at 2 a.m. with a speeder. I have had many animals killed on Churchill, and the cars don't even stop. What is the strategy?
No, I'm sorry, Terry, to hear that. That's terrible. So as far as the takings question, no, I would not. I do not like any kind of government taking of private property, especially when we're talking about homes. I mean, a person's home is one of the most incredibly personal and important things to us. And I was talking to my wife just last night about the fires in Boulder Creek, and just saying how devastated I would be if my parents lost their home, because it feels like a family member. So government takings, I think, is pretty much out of the question. Then as far as the speeding solutions, I don't know the proper solution off the top of my head. But as I've talked about a lot here, and I wish I did. I'm sorry, Terry. But I've talked about a lot here. The need of not reinventing the wheel and looking at best practices around the state and the country. I've always been really shocked in my experience in my kind of different governmental roles, that we so often just stay in our own bubble and focus on and reinventing the wheel and coming up with our own solutions, and how little we actually work with surrounding communities, not only here, but again, global. I mean, we're a global community, and communities all around the world are facing those same problems. And so I'd be really committed to finding the best way to be able to address these type of situations if police is not going to be what helps, especially like you mentioned at 2 a.m.
Okay, it was important to me to bring in Terry's comments here again, even though you went through some of the answers already, because I just wanted her to be heard here.
Well, she's a fellow Giants fan, so I'm with you, Terry.
Awesome. So we have a couple of more concerns. The first concern comes from our member, Lisa. She would like to know, Lisa Chang, she would like to know how you would manage the RV parking situation on El Camino, or specifically, how would you deal with the homeless situation in Palo Alto?
Yeah, really great question. One of the things that I would really be interested in expanding. I've been glad to see that certain council members, I think Councilmember Koo is on this call right now. She, as well as Supervisor Simidian and the Board of Supervisors, have been looking at finding ways to expand our safe parking program. I think that's going to be one of the keys to be able to help people who are in their RVs on El Camino. I mean, it really is kind of heartbreaking walking by there. I've done it several times, taking a little stroll through Stanford on one of my breaks, and there's this one family over there by the light on Churchill. There's like 4 or 5 young kids in there with the family, and they're always outside. It looks like they're having a great time, but my heart always breaks a little bit for them. That's the best we can do in Palo Alto, to have people living in RVs on a crowded street with young kids. That's really, really dangerous. It's not sanitary. There's a lot of problems there. This is one of the things that I've been working on at the county level, trying to find solutions for issues like this. And I do think, again, it's kind of one, true investment in affordable housing in Palo Alto, and making sure that there's sort of a right of first refusal to people who live in Palo Alto would be able to help, as well as expanding our safe parking lot program, which is still in its infancy, to really find ways to be able to expand that. And I think the churches in this community are really warming up to it. They're seeing that these different pilot programs are really working. And so if we can really get a robust program going on, not only for Palo Alto churches, but again, working with surrounding communities, I think we can make a really good difference.
Okay, let me get to the next question. That comes from Susan Newman. She's writing, the claim was made on a recent Palo Alto online blog that the city is run by the city manager rather than by city council members. Do you share that impression? What do you think should be done to address this if you think it is true?
Well, the sort of the hierarchy of this city is supposed to be residents on top, city council, then city manager, and the various city appointed officers. My experience over the past several years is that hierarchy has been flipped on its head, and yes, oftentimes it seems like the city manager is the one who's sort of promoting city staff's agenda. And oftentimes when there's been far too many times when council directs city staff to do something, and city staff's response is sort of like, oh, our plates are too full, we can't get that done. And yeah, I'm not a businessman, but I would imagine in business, at least this was how it was when as an attorney, if you can't get the job done, then they're going to find somebody who can. And so that has been a frustration for me. I do believe that city council's job is to direct the city manager and city staff, not the other way around. And so I do believe city council can be far more assertive, saying, no, these are our requests, these are our demands, because we represent the people of Palo Alto, not the other way around. And and again, if city staff and the city manager are not going to do that, well, again, they're employees of the city and they work for us.
Great. Let me move on to a topic that's also dear to a lot of people, and that is the situation in Foothills Park. So there have been ideas of opening it up for other people, not just for Palo Alto residents. And then maybe we can tie that into a larger complex of your ideas for the environment, because I know I've seen it on your page. That was one of the topics that was also dear to you.
So as far as Foothill Parks goes, I mean, I know City Council came up with a decision back in July to have this pilot program for a year, allowing 1,050 people in maximum a day, both residents and non-residents, and charging a $6 fee for non-residents. And then to have it on the ballot in 2022 for the voters to support. So yeah, that was a decision council made back in July. I would continue to support that program. I would continue to support the pilot program and kind of continue to support this council's wishes to kind of keep that precedent going of placing then the Foothills Park issue on the agenda. I've always thought that the idea that it was a misdemeanor for a non-Palo Alto resident to go into the park was outrageous and should have been abolished a long time ago. I do like the idea that we need to make sure that Foothills Park is revenue neutral. I don't think we should be making money off of non-residents coming into the park, but at the same time as well, when Palo Alto is going through one of our greatest economic crises in decades, we need to make sure that we need to be able to then afford the extra rangers that are there, as well as recognizing that it is a nature preserve and wanting to make sure that we're balancing the needs for people to be able to go outside and enjoy nature and have that being done in an equitable way, but also balancing that with the needs of the wildlife and the habitat that is Foothills Park.
Great, thank you very much. So we have a couple of loose questions out there that I would like to address One was from Judith Fields, going back to this complex of housing. Maybe you can just bring yourself to go over that one one more time. Define below market housing. How could an apartment fit into that definition?
So define below market housing. So I mean, like, so housing, it all depends on the area median income of individuals. So I believe in Palo Alto, to be classified as like below market rate or for that inclusionary zoning, the cap is 120% AMI, area median income, and that's, you know, it's one of those areas where you know, like the average city employee and the average school district employee make around $110,000 a year. That's at around 120, 130% AMI. So we sort of see this problem that we do have this deed restricted below market rate housing that does not then help other workers in the community who still can't afford to live in Palo Alto, but they make over that 120% threshold. So that's one of those problems that we need to be able to also create housing for people that fit within that bracket, as well as the more low-income communities as well. And then as far as the rental housing goes, it would just work pretty much the same way as deed restricted below market rate housing for housing that you could purchase. When you apply for one of these apartments, you just have to be able to show what your income level is, and as long as you are within that AMI percentage, you would then be able to rent out that apartment. And then, of course, we'd have to get into the minutia of, okay, well, if you then are fortunate enough to be able to make more money while you're living in that apartment, what happens then? What's the timeline? Does it get prorated? I mean, I think those are details that, of course, would need to be worked out.
Thank you for clarifying that for Judith. Let me ask you another question that is posted by Lisa Chang. Do you think for the residential properties that Stanford purchased, should they pay the same property tax as we do? Can the city or the county impose that?
Should they pay the same property taxes we do? I mean, I think out of fairness, yes. I don't know what.
They don't.
Sorry?
I believe they don't currently.
Yeah, I believe I want to say Stanford is exempted from that. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure that they are, which again kind of goes back to that original question. One of the original questions I think that maybe Abby asked, I can't remember, sorry, as far as Stanford housing, and again, I mean, it's unfair to all of us. I mean, one of my kind of key beliefs of government, and same way that I do my job here as a teacher, is that fairness is one of the most fundamental pieces. I think generally people are going to be okay and get over a decision that they disagree with. But I find that if people feel like they were heard, and if people feel like the process was fair, then they're going to be okay with it. They may disagree with it, but they're going to be okay with it. And so I think that's sort of one of the kind of like the guiding, my moral compass when it comes to governing is people need to be heard, and it needs to be fair. And in this situation, it clearly is not fair.
Okay, so I'm just finishing up on a couple of questions that came in. Susan Newman would like to know, how would you structure a business tax or other efforts to increase the city budget?
Yeah, as far as the business tax, again, this is one of those issues because of COVID. Obviously, this is not the time to be doing it with the struggles of the business community in Palo Alto. But when we recover, I think it's going to be key. One, I would not want to have a business tax that simply goes into the general budget. I do think that business tax needs to be reserved for affordable housing and transportation improvements as well in the community. So those are two areas where I really think that business tax needs to be focused on. We need to be careful when we really start kind of then opening up the floodgates, because then that pie is going to get really, really small, really, really quick. but it is kind of ridiculous that Palo Alto is one of the very few cities in this region that don't have a business tax, and yet this is such a desirable place to be able to do business. And these concerns that a business tax is then going to force businesses out of here. Studies have shown that is just not the case. That businesses don't really. It makes logical sense, but studies really show that businesses don't make those decisions based on the taxes that they're paying within a community. And so we can model it off after cities in the region that have done it and been able to find ways to be able to keep those businesses within town. As far as should it be a head count tax or square footage, I think that's one of those areas where I would just be interested in studying it more and seeing kind of what city staff would propose as far as what's going to give us the best return on that.
Okay, so maybe we can finish off with two more questions. One that came to me, posted by someone who doesn't want to be named. Who supports you for transparency reason? Are you taking money for your campaign from interest groups? That was the first question. And the second one, straightforward, are you a progressive? Judging on your posters in the background, I would say probably yes.
Yes. Okay. So answering the first question, no, I'm not taking any money from kind of outside interests, special interests, developers, corporations. I really see this as a grassroots campaign. And so I rely on people like you, residents within the community, to be able to help get my message out. So if you're interested in donating, go to www.greerstone.com. Sorry, I learned that from Joe Biden. Every time I watched his debate, he would throw that out. So that's pretty good. And then yes, progressive, definitely a progressive. I'm a Democratic delegate for AD 24 as well. So I've been fortunate to be going to the different conventions, and also I was really fortunate. I got all my conventions in before the pandemic. My heart really goes out to those delegates who are going to be going to the Democratic convention last week. That must have been such a heartbreaker for them. But yes, I'm a proud Democrat, lifelong Democrat, and a progressive one at that.
So then let's leave the most important question to last. So when gun blaze Pally, who are you for?
Oh, that I am dreading that moment. When that moment comes, I don't know. It has to be Pally. It has to be Pally. I mean, I got my Pally mug here at all times, and so it's where my heart is. Hopefully, the gun students won't take it too personally.
Well, Greer, thank you very much. You already got your pitch in to have us donate if we support what you were saying tonight, and I think a lot of people learned a lot of things about you. Thank you very much for taking the time and be so specific in all your answers. We truly appreciated it. And we hope to see you in the forum that Freda mentioned at the very beginning on October 1st, where all the candidates will be present.
Absolutely. Thank you again to all of you for spending your Thursday night with me. Thank you, Jeanette, Freda, and Susan for organizing this. It's been a pleasure. I really look forward to the day when I can actually meet all of you in person and shake your hands. And yeah, so stay safe, everybody. Stay healthy, and I'll see you around.